Hello and welcome to the next video on CSS box model. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the use of borders, padding, and margins to style individual elements with the understanding of the box model. And so we'll work on that, and this will be useful information for those of you still working on the lab on the gallery. All right, so let's get to it. Let's take a look at what I've got set up here. So I've got an HTML here. I'm calling this gallery.html. You can see I've got a head. I've identified my title, which you see up here, and I've linked already some style sheets, and I've used some Google API fonts to go ahead and change some of the text that's on the page. You'll notice also here in the body that I'm using the semantic tag figure to wrap my images and a caption for each of those images within the figure. And you see here that each of my images have a little caption here where I've identified where I got the photo from and provided a link to that particular website just to kind of acknowledge where those images came from. And this is, again, a nice structural way to start your HTML. If you're going to have pictures and captions for those pictures, this is kind of how you would set that up. Now, if we go into the CSS, you can see I've already started a few things here, basic things. The background color has been changed. I've aligned my text to be center. And I'm changing my box sizing to border box. And what that does is in the box model, when you set height and width, you're identifying the height and width of the content. And that's when it's set to content box. And I'll switch this here so you can see content box is the default. And that means when I set height, width, I'm setting the height and width of the content. And then if I add borders and padding and margins and all that, that's outside the content, making it actually larger than what I had intended. So I'm switching this to border box, in which the border determined the height, determined the border, and all that's inside of the height. The content will be adjusted to be within the height limits that I've set. So that's box sizing. And then, I've added the font families that I got from the Google font webpage. And I've also put a little border for the figure and fig captions. So you see my captions are centered within this figure. But notice that the picture is outside of the figure, right? It's not being contained. And this is what we call overflow. The size of the content is larger than the box that it's contained within. And so it's overflowing. I could change some of those so that I could deal with that by using overflow. So I could set overflow to visible, which is what it's already at. I could set it to hidden. And if I set it to hidden, now you see the picture does not extend outside of the box anymore. It didn't resize the picture. The picture is still the same size, but you just can't see it anymore. It's now been hidden. That doesn't really help me too much here. So another option I could use would be to scroll. And if I set my overflow to scroll, now you see I have the ability to go sideways to look at that picture. I also, it gave me the vertical, but the box is expanding vertically to accommodate the content, but it's not expanding horizontally for the content. But it is providing me the ability to scroll so that I could see it all. But that's not really what I want. So again, overflow isn't going to help me here. So we'll go ahead and take that out. What I'm going to do instead is come down to my image, because I want all of my images to fit within the container that I have them in. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my width to be 90%. So it's 90% of the container that it's in. So if the container gets bigger, the picture gets bigger. If the container gets smaller, the picture gets smaller. It'll always be 90%. There we go. And now you see my images are all now within the container that they have, which is the figure. And notice also that when I adjusted the width, the height automatically adjusts for each of the pictures because I didn't specify a height, so it keeps the same aspect ratio. And now you can see by adjusting that width and setting that width to a percentage, I make my page work pretty nicely. And again, if I expand my page, the photo automatically expands to be 90% of that size. So back in here, let's go ahead and see if we got that. There we go. All right. So in here, we're going to go ahead and start styling some of these. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I put this border on here, the silver border, to show you that this border is on the figure. And these two elements, which is the image and the figure caption, are both within that border. But I'm going to go ahead and take this off. And we're going to go down and we're going to put some individual borders. So now if I take that off, you see that silver border has gone away. So we're going to go ahead and put some borders on each of the pictures. So if I set border, I have to identify how large I want this border to be. So let's go ahead and do something like 15 pixels. I have to determine what type of border I wanted. So let's do a dot inset. Now I have to pick a color. So we'll start with maybe a dark gray and see how that looks. So there's a dark gray, and you see it's going around just the image itself because now I've identified each image with the ID pick one, and I'm putting a border around the image only, so it's only going around that image. Now, some other things I can adjust on this image. I could adjust the padding. So if I go in here and adjust the padding, I could set it to something like maybe 10 pixels. It gives some space. The padding is the spacing between the elements and the content and the border of the element. And that's padding. So you see by increasing that to 10 pixels, I have 10 pixels worth of space on each side. If I make this bigger, say 15 pixels, then I get a little bit extra spacing. But if you notice that the size of the element didn't really change, just the border. And the picture is kind of adjusting within that border box setting. So it appears that there's space between there and you're looking at the background of the body because of the same color, but I can change this background color of the pick one and you'll see that the padding is actually on top of the background. So let's go in here. Let's do maybe something like a dark slate gray. And there you can see now that this padding is actually a part of the image one. And that is on top of the border, the body. All right. So we can come down here and that's what I'm looking for is a little bit of change, right? Add a border, change some padding. Down here in pick two, we can do border as well. And let's do something like, let's do a 30 pixel border. And let's do, we'll do an outset. And let's change it. Let's give this a brighter color. And see how that sticks out. Okay, so not too bad, but let's see if we can maybe get something a little different here. And that sticks out from the background a little bit more. But again, let's add a little bit. We can do margin this time. So let's add maybe 10 pixels of margin. I'm going to refresh it. Notice that that separates outside the border. So you see up here between this image and this caption, there's just a little bit of space there. But here, the caption has gotten further away from the image. And up here between this caption and this image, it's also increased the space. We can kind of exaggerate that a little bit for this one. Make it 20 pixels, and maybe you can see that a little clearer. So now you see it more separation as well here. So, but notice it's also offsetting on the left and the right. So they used to be lined up. These two borders were lined up with each other, but now the margin is being pushed over to the side because I'm identifying 20 pixels as the margin. That's the top, bottom, left, and right. So let's say I don't want the left and right to be 20 pixels. I could establish it to be 0 pixels here. So by giving it two values, what I've done is I've identified the top and bottom margin. I want the top and bottom margins to be 20 pixels, and I want the left and right margin to be 0 pixels. So that way I can kind of specify a difference between what's happening on the sides and what's happening on the top and bottom. And now you notice that that alignment has worked back to what I wanted it to be. Now, let's say, the top is 20 pixels. So it's 20 pixels from here, but it's also giving me 20 pixels from this figure caption. I don't really want the figure caption to get farther away. So I could even go into more detail here and say, I want the top to be 20 pixels. I want the right side to be 0 pixels. I want the bottom to maybe be 5 pixels. And I'll make the left also 0 pixels. So now by giving it 4 values, I've individually styled all 4 of them. So top is 20, right is 0, bottom is 5, left is 0. So it goes clockwise from top all the way around. All right. So, but maybe I don't want to have all this stuff here. One thing you could do is, in addition to using margin, which establishes margins for all 4 sides, you could individually identify. So maybe I just want margin top. And I could say, just give the top 20 pixels. And let's not worry about the bottom at all. And now you see I keep the margin on the top, and the margin on the bottom has not changed. My left and my right has not changed because I individually selected margin top. You can do the same thing with padding, right? So if I wanted to adjust the padding, I could do the same thing. So we can come in here and say padding, and let's say I want my top and bottom padding to be, maybe give it 30 pixels, and then I'll make my bottom padding be something like, let's do 15 pixels. And let's actually go ahead and take this background color and let's throw that up here and make that the background color of all my images. So I don't have to individually do that. So there we go. Now you see in this image, we have the padding being adjusted for both the top and bottom, and the left and right being slightly different, and how that is adjusting to make my picture look a little different. All right. And let's go in here. Let's do down here on this next one. I think this one would work pretty well to kind of show you some additional features you can do with the border. So let's go ahead and give this nice goldenrod border. We make it 20 pixels, and let's do a ridge. And on this one, if we go ahead and do this, there's what that's going to look like. That's the ridge. And we can go ahead and add some border radius. So if we set border radius, now this is going to curve my corners. Notice that all my corners here are very square. So if I set my corner to something like 20 pixels, then you see I get some curving at the edges. I could increase this, and as I increase it, it becomes more round, right? Now I could just go a full, let's say 50% for the border radius. That gives you a nice oval here. If I wanted a full circle, I'd go 100%. But it's not really giving us a complete circle. What it's giving us is completely rounded edges all the way around. But we're not getting a nice clean circle because our height and our width are different from each other. So if I wanted a nice clean circle, I could come in here and adjust my width, and let's give it some kind of value. Let's say something like 300 pixels. And then let's go ahead and give the width, height also to be 300 pixels. And then a border radius of 100%. And then we get a nice, clean, round circle. Now, additionally, instead of a percentage, I could also make my border radius 300 pixels. And that gets the exact same thing because it's 100% of the width and 100% of the height, which gives me a nice, clean circle. So that's working with border radius and showing you how you can kind of get a different feel for that. So just looking through here and trying to adjust each of these to kind of make the picture gallery a little different, using different colors, using different styles of border, different thicknesses of border, using border radius. All of these things adjust the individual element, and you can see how those border properties of padding, border, margin can be used to style and make the images and make the different aspects of your page look nice and stand out on the page by using colors and borders to offset and to add some style. All right, so that's what I'm looking for in this lab. If you have any questions, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.